I am always glad to share a church leader tool, but especially when a congregation asks me for a particular topic. And that's true of this one, ministry handoff through the generations. I suspect that there are a number of congregations where this is a challenge to successfully hand ministry from one generation to the next. So I hope that this church leader tool will be helpful. So the first thing that I would share would be a little bit of the culture you want for a good ministry handoff. This might really be the why. We always want to start with the why. Why would we want to do this well? And a couple of thoughts in that area. First, we want to develop a culture of involvement. That is to involve as many people as possible within the ministry of the congregation. I heard of a church consultant who was working with a congregation about involving people, and the pastor came back to the consultant and said he was so excited he was able to trim down to a bare minimum the number of people who were involved. And the consultant said, no, you misunderstood the task. We want to figure out how to involve as many people as possible in the life of the congregation, to help them use their spiritual gifts, to help them be invested in the church, to be used by God. So you want to create a culture where as many people as possible are being involved, and where leadership is really being handed off, where leaders are helping other leaders to grow. We want that culture, maybe like the military, where there are all kinds of different people growing in their leadership skills from one rank, if you will, to the other. And those leadership skills are being handed from one person to the next person. We want a culture of generational ministry where leadership and faith is being handed from one generation to the next. I love the story told to me by a wonderful saint named Louise, who was probably in her late 80s when she told me this, of how somebody who was her age was complaining about children at the worship service. And Louise looked at her and said, "How long do you expect to live? You and I will be gone in a couple of years. And if we don't hand the church and our faith off to the next generation, then it will disappear." So we have to have that mentality of handing faith and ministry from one generation to the next. And part of that is a generational handoff of one generation saying, not that I'm done in ministry, and not that I'm going to hold on to my ministry until I'm gone, but I'm really going to intentionally hand that to the next generation. I can think about older leaders who have said to me through the years, when I've asked them to step into a leadership role, they've said, "No, Pastor Stewart, I'm not going to do that, but what I will do is be part of that team and help raise up a next generation. I'll help somebody else be the leader of that team." And that's a wonderful attitude of generational handoff. And last, let me note that we do have biblical models for this. Let me point out two real quick. The first of those is between Elijah, the prophet Elijah, who hands off his ministry to Elisha. He knows that his ministry will not last forever and needs to hand that off to the younger prophet, which is in fact exactly what he does. Or in the New Testament, a wonderful example of this is Paul, who is clearly an older, experienced Christian leader who hands off that ministry to Timothy. And of course, we have his two letters that encourage Timothy. So in the scriptures, we have this generational handoff. So that's some of the reasons of the why of passing ministry through the generations. Now let's talk for a moment about the process of ministry handoff. And really, this is the how. How does one go about this? So first, there needs to be some deep conversation between two leaders of different generations to get to know each other and really to develop a sense of rapport and a sense of trust, which will make everything that takes place after that deeper and more successful. So first, just getting to know each other. And then second, they want to spend some time appreciating and understanding their different generations. Each of them will come with a different perspective. Likely the one who has been doing the ministry from an older generation has some wisdom and some things that have been collected, but to understand that the younger person will have a different perspective, a knowledge of people in their own generation that is well worth holding on to understand that they're going to have those differences, and that's good because both of them will bring more wisdom than either individually. And then third, they want to develop a sense of trust and understanding. That trust I mentioned before, to understand as well the unique differences that they each bring. The example of this I would use is I looked up how a baton pass is done effectively in a relay race. And the qualities that are needed to make that effective are that they trust each other and that they understand each other's abilities. The person, particularly in front, cannot turn around and look behind them. They need to trust that that other person is back there and to understand their particular skills. Same thing in a ministry handoff, to understand each other and to learn to trust each other that the handoff will go well. And then fourth, there needs to be a letting go, which can be difficult for a person who has been doing that ministry for a number of years perhaps, but ultimately they will need to let go to effectively pass that to another person. I really like the quote that I came across in the book, Less is More Leadership. The quote is, "Nothing feels better than seeing a vision that you helped birth be passed on to the capable hands of others." To have that attitude of that letting go, knowing we won't be able to lead a ministry forever, and passing that on to the next generation. And then fifth, there needs to be an organizational as well as an emotional release. I knew a woman who did this very effectively in a preschool that she started and then slowly stepped back from, and that preschool is still very effective and continuing. And if you think about it as a little Punnett square where there is an emotional release and an organizational release, and this is what I saw this leader do over a period of years, you might think that in the beginning, somebody would have a high emotional and organizational investment and then step down to where they have less, usually of an organizational investment, but probably still a high emotional investment, still care, and then step to the point where they have a low emotional and low organizational investment, slowly stepping back from both so that that release is effective and is handed off. It is often helpful as well, as a sixth thought, to develop a written church process in this. How is this done effectively? To codify some of this in a document that can be shared with different leaders so they effectively know how to hand off ministry from one person to the next. And understand that this takes practice, this takes work. It may not always be effective at the beginning, but if it's entered into with trust and love and a desire to see this happen effectively, a congregation and the leaders in it will become successful at this. Because in the end, we must become good at this. At its worst, if one generation never hands down ministry to the next one, then that is the end of that congregation. That ministry will ultimately pass away and a congregation will end. So this is a skill that we ultimately need to be good at, to learn to pass ministry successfully from one generation to the next. Well, I hope that this church leader tool has been a blessing for you. I would ask you and encourage you to share this with other leaders, especially in your context where you know ministry needs to be handed from one generation to the next. Take care and God bless.